German Shepherd was lost outside a supermarket. What baby did next? Left everyone in tears. The story you're about to listen to will break your heart and then put it back together again. If you've ever felt a connection with an animal that goes beyond explanation, this one's for you. Like, share, and let us know where you're watching from. Rain pounded against the windshield like tiny fists demanding entry. 5-year-old Emma stared out through the blurry glass, her small fingers tracing the path of racing droplets. The supermarket parking lot had become a maze of glistening puddles, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Her father, Daniel, drummed his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. "Just a quick stop, Em," he said, reaching for his wallet. "We need milk and bread before the storm gets worse. You want to stay here where it's warm and dry?" Emma nodded, clutching her stuffed rabbit closer to her chest. The toy was worn with love, one ear slightly frayed, its once bright fur now faded to a soft gray. "Me and Hoppy will wait, Daddy." Daniel smiled, ruffling her blonde curls. "That's my brave girl. Lock the doors after me, okay? I'll be super quick." As her father dashed through the rain toward the sliding doors of the supermarket, Emma watched his figure blur and vanish. The car felt suddenly bigger without him. Outside, the storm intensified, raindrops becoming angry pellets against the metal roof. She hugged Hoppy tighter. That's when she heard it. At first, Emma thought it was just the wind, that low, mournful sound that sometimes snuck through cracks in windows on stormy nights. But this was different. It was broken, scattered between gusts of wind and the drumming rain. A whimper, then another. Emma pressed her face against the cold window, her breath creating small clouds of fog on the glass. She wiped them away impatiently, trying to see through the sheets of rain. "Did you hear that, Hoppy?" she whispered to her stuffed companion. Another whimper floated through the air, slightly louder this time. Emma's eyes widened. "Someone's crying." She unbuckled her seatbelt and climbed onto her knees, peering out the back window. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered across the wet asphalt. Nothing moved except the dancing raindrops and swaying trees at the edge of the lot. The sound came again. Definitely a cry, but not a human cry. Emma knew what that sounded like from the playground when Tommy Peterson skinned his knee last week. This was different, raw and animal-like. "Someone's hurt, Hoppy," she said firmly, her small face set with determination. "Daddy said to wait, but—" Another whimper cut through the rain, and something twisted inside Emma's chest. It felt like an invisible string was tugging at her heart, pulling her toward the sound. Without thinking further, she unlocked the door and pushed it open. The blast of cold air and rain hit her face, but she barely noticed. Emma stepped out, her purple rain boots splashing in a puddle. Rain immediately soaked through her light jacket. Clutching Hoppy to her chest with one hand, she used the other to shield her eyes from the downpour. "Hello?" she called out, her voice small against the roaring storm. "Are you okay?" The whimpering stopped abruptly. Emma stood still, rain plastering her blonde hair to her forehead. She was about to give up when it came again, fainter, but definitely there, coming from behind the store. Emma glanced back at the car, then at the supermarket entrance where her father had disappeared. She knew she wasn't supposed to wander off. Daddy would be mad, but the crying, it sounded so sad, so lonely. "We have to help," she told Hoppy decisively. "Daddy would understand." With that, she started walking, each step sending water splashing up her legs. She rounded the corner of the supermarket building, away from the bright lights of the storefront, into the shadowed area behind the store where the dumpsters loomed like sleeping giants. The whimpering grew louder. Emma slowed, suddenly aware of how dark it was back here. The security lights cast eerie shadows across the wet pavement. Large metal dumpsters created maze-like corridors between them. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the wind still whipped around the building corner, sending a chill down her spine. "Hello?" she called again, her voice smaller now. "I won't hurt you." A sound. Movement from behind the furthest dumpster. Emma froze. For the first time, a flicker of fear sparked inside her. What if it wasn't something hurt? What if it was something scary? The monster under her bed that Daddy always insisted wasn't real? She was about to turn back when she saw it, a dark shape shifting in the shadows. Then a pair of eyes caught the dim light, reflecting a soft amber glow. Not human eyes, animal eyes. The creature moved slightly, and Emma gasped. It was a dog, a big one, with pointed ears and a long snout. A German Shepherd, soaked to the skin, its magnificent coat now matted and dirty. It was huddled against the wall, trying to find shelter from the rain under the slight overhang of the building. When it saw Emma, it flattened its ears against its head and let out another soft whimper. "Oh," Emma breathed, her fear vanishing instantly. "You're just a doggy." The dog watched her warily, its body tense. Emma had never seen such sad eyes before. They seemed to hold all the world's sorrow. She took a small step forward, and the dog flinched. "It's okay," she said softly, the way her mother had taught her to speak to nervous animals. "I won't hurt you. Are you lost?" The dog's eyes never left her face. It was shivering, Emma noticed. Whether from cold or fear, she couldn't tell. Probably both. She wanted to wrap her arms around it and make the shivering stop. She took another careful step. The dog didn't retreat, but its body tensed even more. Emma stopped, then had an idea. She held out Hoppy. "This is Hoppy," she said solemnly. "He keeps me safe when I'm scared. You can hold him if you want." The dog's eyes flicked from Emma to the stuffed rabbit and back again. Its ears twitched slightly, moving from their flattened position to a more alert stance. Encouraged, Emma took another step forward, still holding out the bedraggled toy. "He's really good at hugs," she explained, "and he doesn't mind getting wet." Another step. She was close enough now to see the dog's ribs through its wet fur. It looked hungry and tired, but still, it didn't growl or run away. Instead, it stretched its neck forward slightly, nose twitching as it sniffed in her direction. "Are you hungry?" Emma asked. She dug into her coat pocket and pulled out a slightly squished cookie her father had given her earlier. "You can have this. It's chocolate chip. Daddy says chocolate is bad for dogs, but there's only tiny chips. I think it's okay." She broke off a small piece of cookie, carefully avoiding the chocolate bits, and held it out on her palm. The dog's nostrils flared. It looked at the offering, then back at Emma's face, as if trying to decide whether to trust this small human. "It's yummy," Emma encouraged. "Promise." Several tense seconds passed. Then slowly, the dog inched forward. Its movement was stiff and cautious, and Emma realized with a jolt that it was limping. One of its front paws was held slightly off the ground. It was hurt. The dog stopped just short of her outstretched hand. It sniffed the cookie, its breath warm against Emma's cold skin. Then, so gently she barely felt it, the dog took the morsel from her palm with soft lips, careful not to use its teeth. "Good doggy," Emma whispered. Something changed in the dog's eyes, a shift from wariness to something else. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. Emma smiled, and miracle of miracles, the dog's tail moved. Just the slightest wag, a hesitant pendulum of hope. "Emma!" The panicked shout shattered the quiet moment. The dog immediately retreated, backing away with a startled whine. Emma turned to see her father running toward her, his face a mask of fear and anger. "Emma Grace Wilson!" "Daddy," she called. "Look, I found a—" "What are you doing out here?" Daniel grabbed her by the shoulders, his fingers digging in almost painfully as he knelt to her level. His eyes were wild, scanning her for injuries. "I came back to the car, and you were gone. Do you have any idea?" His voice broke. "You can't just disappear like that." "But Daddy, I heard—" "No buts. You never leave the car alone. Never. Do you understand me?" Daniel was shaking, Emma realized. Not from cold, but from fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "But the dog—" "Dog? What dog?" Daniel looked past her, finally registering the German shepherd cowering by the dumpster. His grip on Emma loosened slightly. "What in the world?" "He was crying, Daddy," Emma said earnestly, wiping at her tears. "I heard him from the car. He's hurt and scared and all alone." Daniel stared at the dog, which was watching them with those same sad amber eyes. The animal was clearly terrified but hadn't run away despite Daniel's shouting. It just stood there, shivering, regarding them with what almost looked like hope. "Oh, Emma," Daniel sighed, his anger deflating. "You can't just— You scared me half to death." "I'm sorry," she repeated. "But he needed help." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He was calling me, Daddy." Daniel gave her a strange look. "Calling you? What do you mean?" Emma struggled to find the words. "In my head, like when you think real hard about something, and it feels like someone else put the thought there." She pointed to her temple. "He was saying, 'help,' over and over." Daniel frowned, concern of a different sort crossing his face now. "Emma, dogs can't talk, not even in thoughts." "This one can," she insisted. "He's special." Before Daniel could respond, the dog took a tentative step forward. Both humans froze, watching as the animal limped closer, its eyes fixed on Emma. It stopped about 2 feet away, then lowered itself to the wet ground in a submissive posture, its head resting on its paws. "See, Daddy," Emma whispered triumphantly. "He knows I want to help." Daniel ran a hand through his wet hair, clearly conflicted. "Emma, we can't just—" "Please, Daddy. Look how cold he is, and he's hurt." Emma broke free of her father's grip and moved toward the dog, ignoring Daniel's warning shout. Before he could stop her, she was kneeling beside the German shepherd, her small hand reaching out. Daniel lunged forward, heart in his throat. "Emma, don't!" But instead of snapping or growling, the dog simply lifted its head and gently licked Emma's outstretched hand. The touch seemed to break something open inside the animal. Its entire body relaxed, and it inched closer to the little girl, seeking warmth and comfort. "Oh," Daniel breathed, frozen in place as he watched his daughter stroke the dog's wet head. The scene before him was surreal, his tiny 5-year-old comforting this huge, powerful animal that could easily hurt her. Yet the dog's eyes were closed now, its expression almost peaceful as Emma's fingers worked through its matted fur. "See, Daddy, he's a good boy," Emma said softly. "He just needs someone to love him." Daniel approached slowly, and the dog's eyes snapped open, watching him. There was no aggression in its gaze, but the wariness had returned. It didn't move from Emma's side, however, seeming to draw strength from her presence. "He needs a vet," Daniel said finally, crouching a few feet away, "and we need to check if anyone's looking for him." Emma's face fell. "But what if no one is? What if he's all alone in the world?" The raw compassion in his daughter's voice caught Daniel off guard. 5 years old, and already she had more empathy than most adults he knew. She was so much like her mother in that way. Sarah had always been the one bringing home strays and wounded birds, unable to pass by any creature in need. The thought of Sarah brought an ache to his chest, as it always did. 2 years gone, and still the pain could knock the wind out of him at unexpected moments. Emma had been only 3 when the cancer took her mother, too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel the loss like a physical wound. Daniel looked at the dog again, really looked this time. Beyond the wet fur and the mud, he could see that it was thin, ribs protruding sharply against its skin. Its coat, which should have been glossy and thick, was dull and patchy in places. One ear had a small tear at the tip, long healed. This wasn't a dog that had just gotten lost today. This was an animal that had been on its own for some time. "We can take him to Dr. Brown," Daniel said finally. "She can check for a microchip, make sure he's not hurt too badly." Emma's face lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Really, Daddy? We can help him?" "We can try," he said carefully. "But Emma, if he belongs to someone—" "He doesn't," she said with such certainty that Daniel blinked in surprise. "He told me." There it was again, that strange insistence that she could somehow communicate with the animal. Daniel opened his mouth to correct her, then closed it again. There would be time for that conversation later. "We'll need to get him in the car," he said instead, looking dubiously at the large dog. "Do you think he'll come with us?" Emma turned to the German shepherd, whose eyes hadn't left her face. "Will you come home with us?" she asked softly. "Just for a little while, until you feel better?" To Daniel's amazement, the dog struggled to its feet, still favoring its injured paw. It stood beside Emma, pressing its body against her small frame as if for support, though who was supporting whom wasn't entirely clear. "I think that's a yes," Daniel said, shaking his head in wonder. Getting the dog to the car proved easier than expected. Despite its injury, it followed Emma without hesitation, limping alongside her through the rain. When they reached the car, however, a new problem presented itself. "He's too big for my lap," Emma said worriedly, as Daniel opened the back door. Daniel hesitated. The dog was filthy, and his clean car. But one look at his daughter's pleading face, and he knew he'd already lost this battle. "I'll put down some shopping bags on the back seat," he sighed, "and when we get home, he's going straight into the bathtub before he touches anything else." Emma beamed, throwing her arms around his waist. "Thank you, Daddy. You're the best daddy in the whole wide world." The simple praise warmed something in Daniel's chest that had been cold for a very long time. With some coaxing from Emma, the dog climbed awkwardly into the back seat, settling onto the makeshift bed of plastic shopping bags. It was still shivering, and without a word, Emma unzipped her coat and draped it over the animal's back. "Emma, you'll catch cold," Daniel protested, but she just shrugged. "He needs it more than me," she said simply. As Daniel started the car, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Emma had nestled herself against the dog's side, her small hand stroking its head in a soothing rhythm. The dog's eyes were half closed, its expression one of cautious contentment, as if it couldn't quite believe this turn of events but was too exhausted to question it. And watching them together, his little girl and this lost creature she'd insisted on saving, Daniel felt something shift inside him, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place after being scattered for far too long. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the car, a small beacon of warmth had been kindled, a tiny flame of hope that Daniel hadn't realized was missing until this moment. "What should we call him?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice drowsy with the warmth of the car's heater. Daniel hesitated. Naming the dog seemed dangerous, a step toward permanence he wasn't sure he was ready for. "Let's wait and see what Dr. Brown says," he hedged. "He might already have a name." Emma shook her head with certainty. "His name is Atlas," she declared. "He told me." "Atlas?" Daniel repeated, surprised. "How do you know such a big word, Em?" "From the book Mommy used to read," she said matter-of-factly. "The one about the man who carried the whole world on his shoulders." She looked down at the dog, whose eyes had drifted closed. "He's been carrying heavy things too." Daniel swallowed hard, unable to speak past the sudden lump in his throat. Sarah's book of Greek myths. He'd forgotten she used to read those to Emma as bedtime stories, simplifying the tales for her young mind. He hadn't opened that book since before. "Atlas," he whispered finally, testing the name. The dog's ear twitched in sleep. As they drove through the rain toward home, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened, something that would change their lives forever. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. But watching his daughter's peaceful face in the rearview mirror, he found himself hoping, for the first time in a long time, that changes might not always be bad. The drive to Dr. Brown's veterinary clinic felt both eternal and too short. Daniel had called ahead, explaining the situation in hurried whispers, while Emma dozed against Atlas's warm body. The clinic was officially closed for the evening, but Dr. Brown, a kind woman in her 60s who had treated the family's pets for years, agreed to meet them for an emergency visit. "He's been through something terrible," Dr. Brown said after her examination, her weathered hands gentle as they moved over Atlas's body. The dog had submitted to her touch with remarkable patience, though his eyes never left Emma's face. "Multiple old injuries that healed poorly. This limp isn't new. Looks like his front paw was broken some time ago and never properly set." Emma sat cross-legged on the floor beside the examination table, her small hand maintaining contact with Atlas's hind leg. "What else?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying a maturity that made Daniel's chest tighten. Dr. Brown hesitated, glancing at Daniel meaningfully. "Well, there are some scars." She parted the fur on the dog's neck, revealing thin white lines barely visible against his skin. "Looks like he might have worn a collar that was too tight for a long time." "Someone hurt him," Emma stated flatly. It wasn't a question. "We don't know that for certain," Daniel said quickly, but Emma shook her head. "He told me, Daddy. He dreamed about it while we were driving. Bad dreams." She looked up at Dr. Brown with eyes too knowing for a 5-year-old. "Can you make the hurt stop?" Dr. Brown's expression softened. "I can help with the physical hurt, sweetheart. The rest..." She knelt to Emma's level. "The rest takes time and lots of love." "I have lots of love," Emma said simply. The microchip scanner beeped negative. No identification, no registered owner. Atlas was officially a ghost, a dog without a past, at least as far as the system was concerned. "What now?" Daniel asked, though something in his gut already knew the answer. "Now you decide if you want to keep him," Dr. Brown said, scratching behind Atlas's ears. The dog leaned into the touch, eyes closing contentedly. "He's healthy enough, aside from being underweight and that old paw injury. With good food and care, he'll be fine." Emma looked up at her father, with such hope that Daniel felt his resolve crumble like sand. "Can we, Daddy? Please, he needs us." Daniel stared at the dog, who was now watching him with those expressive amber eyes. There was intelligence there, a deep, almost human awareness that made him uncomfortable, as if the animal could see straight through to his soul and was measuring what it found there. "We'll try," he said finally, "for now." Emma's squeal of joy was so loud that Atlas startled, but then his tail began to wag, the first truly enthusiastic response they'd seen from him. The ride home was different from the trip to the clinic. Atlas seemed more relaxed, as if he understood that these humans meant him no harm. He even allowed Daniel to pet him while Emma dozed against his side, her small body finally succumbing to the exhaustion of the evening's emotions. Their house was a modest two-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where children rode bikes on sidewalks and neighbors knew each other's names. Daniel had bought it when Sarah was pregnant, dreaming of the life they'd build there together. Now, pulling into the driveway with a strange dog in his back seat and his sleeping daughter in his arms, he wondered what Sarah would think of this latest development. She'd love it, he realized with a pang. Sarah had always wanted a dog. Getting Atlas into the house proved more complicated than expected. The dog balked at the front steps, suddenly reluctant to enter the unfamiliar space. He sniffed the air anxiously, his body tense with old fears. "It's okay," Emma said sleepily, taking the dog's massive head in her small hands. "This is home now. Safe home." Something in her voice seemed to reach him. Atlas looked into her eyes for a long moment, then slowly climbed the steps and crossed the threshold. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Daniel filled bowls with water and the leftover chicken from dinner, while Emma showed Atlas around the house, narrating each room like a tour guide. The dog followed her faithfully, his limp more pronounced now that the adrenaline had worn off. "This is the living room where we watch movies," Emma explained seriously, "and this is the kitchen where Daddy makes pancakes on Sunday, and this—" She paused at the foot of the staircase, looking up toward the second floor. "This is where the bedrooms are. Mine has glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling." Atlas tilted his head, listening to her chatter with apparent fascination. When she sat on the bottom step, he immediately settled beside her, his bulk dwarfing her small frame. "Are you tired?" she asked, running her fingers through his now dry fur. It was cleaner than it had looked when wet, revealing a beautiful pattern of black, tan, and cream. "You can sleep in my room if you want. I have a really big bed." Daniel opened his mouth to protest. The dog was still essentially a stranger, but the words died as he watched the interaction. Atlas had pressed closer to Emma, his head resting in her lap with complete trust. The sight stirred something deep in Daniel's chest, a recognition he couldn't quite name. "Maybe for tonight," he heard himself saying, "but we need to get him properly bathed first." The bathing process turned into an adventure. Atlas submitted to the warm water with surprising grace, standing patiently in the tub while Daniel worked shampoo through his coat. Emma supervised from her perch on the closed toilet seat, offering encouragement and commentary. "You're being so brave," she told the dripping dog. "Daddy gives good baths. He makes special voices for all my bath toys." "I do not make voices," Daniel protested, but he was smiling. "You make the rubber ducky sound like Elvis," Emma giggled. "Tell Atlas about Elvis Duck." Despite himself, Daniel found himself explaining the concept of Elvis Duck to a German shepherd who listened with apparent interest, head tilted at an attentive angle. The absurdity of the situation hit him suddenly, and he started laughing, really laughing, for the first time in longer than he could remember. Clean and dry, Atlas looked like a completely different animal. His coat was thick and lustrous, his bearing more confident. He was a beautiful dog, Daniel realized. The kind of animal that should be winning ribbons at dog shows, not cowering behind dumpsters. That night, Emma insisted on setting up a bed for Atlas beside her own, an old comforter arranged carefully on the floor. Daniel tucked her in, kissing her forehead, as he had every night since she was born. "Thank you for letting us help him, Daddy," she whispered. "He was so scared before, but now he knows he's home." "How do you know that, Em?" She smiled sleepily. "Because he stopped shaking, and his dreams aren't scary anymore." Daniel glanced at Atlas, who had already settled onto the makeshift bed. The dog's eyes were closed, his breathing deep and even. For the first time since they'd found him, he looked truly peaceful. "Sleep tight, little bird," Daniel said, using Sarah's old pet name for Emma. "Sleep tight, Daddy. Sleep tight, Atlas." Daniel was halfway down the hall when he heard Emma's voice again, so soft he almost missed it. "Don't worry. The bad man can't find you here." Daniel froze, ice flooding his veins. He turned back, but Emma was already asleep, her breathing deep and regular. Atlas, however, had lifted his head and was staring directly at Daniel, those amber eyes wide and alert in the darkness. For a moment, they regarded each other in silence. Then Atlas slowly lowered his head back to his paws, but his eyes remained open, watching the doorway as if standing guard. Daniel retreated to his own room, but sleep eluded him. Every creak of the old house settling made him tense, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Emma's words echoed in his mind. "The bad man can't find you here." What bad man? And how could a 5-year-old possibly know about things that might have happened to a stray dog? Around midnight, he heard the soft click of toenails on hardwood. Daniel sat up, listening. The sounds moved down the hall, paused at the top of the stairs, then continued down to the first floor. A few minutes later, the same pattern in reverse. Atlas was patrolling, making rounds like a guard dog protecting his territory, protecting Emma. The thought should have been comforting, but instead, Daniel felt a chill. What was the dog protecting her from, and why did it feel like he was preparing for something specific? The next morning brought sunshine and the illusion of normalcy. Atlas seemed more comfortable in daylight, following Emma around the kitchen as she helped Daniel make breakfast. The dog's appetite was enormous. He wolfed down 2 bowls of kibble and was still looking hopefully at their plates. "He's making up for lost time," Daniel observed, refilling the water bowl for the 3rd time. Emma nodded sagely. He was really hungry and thirsty and lonely. She paused, a spoonful of cereal halfway to her mouth. "Daddy, what's a compound?" Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. A compound? Where did you hear that word? Atlas dreamed about it, a big place with tall fences and lots of dogs in cages. Emma's expression grew troubled. They were all scared, and there was a man who hurt them when they cried. "Emma, dogs don't," Daniel began, then stopped. The certainty in his daughter's voice was unnerving. "You had a bad dream, sweetheart. That's all." But even as he said it, Daniel's eyes found the thin scars on Atlas's neck that Dr. Brown had pointed out. Scars from a collar worn too tight for too long. And the way the dog had flinched yesterday when a car backfired in the parking lot. The reaction of an animal familiar with harsh sounds, with violence. "It wasn't my dream," Emma insisted quietly. "It was his. He showed me." Before Daniel could respond, Atlas suddenly went rigid, his head snapping toward the front window. A low growl rumbled in his chest, the first aggressive sound they had heard from him. Daniel followed the dog's gaze but saw nothing unusual, just the quiet street, a few neighbors walking dogs, the mailman making his rounds. But Atlas remained tense, watching something Daniel couldn't see, and when the mailman's truck drove away, the dog didn't relax. Instead, he positioned himself between Emma and the window, his body language screaming protection mode. "What is it, boy?" Daniel asked, moving to the window himself. There, parked across the street under the shade of an old oak tree, was a black sedan that hadn't been there the night before. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, and the license plate was obscured by shadow. As Daniel watched, the engine started, and the car pulled away, moving slowly down the street until it disappeared around the corner. Probably nothing. A visitor to one of the neighbors, maybe someone running errands in the area, but something about the timing, the way the car had left just as Daniel noticed it, made his skin crawl. Atlas finally relaxed when the sedan was out of sight, but he remained alert, ears pricked for any unusual sound. Throughout the morning, he made periodic trips to various windows, checking the perimeter like a soldier on watch. Emma noticed too. "He's worried about something," she said, stroking the dog's head as he stood guard at the living room window. "He keeps thinking about the man with cold eyes." "What man, Em?" She shrugged, but her expression was troubled. "The one from his dreams, the one who made all the dogs scared." She looked up at Daniel with eyes too serious for her age. "He's looking for Atlas, Daddy. That's why we have to keep him safe." Daniel wanted to dismiss it as childhood imagination, but the black sedan lingered in his mind. And watching Atlas, the way the dog moved through the house with purpose, the intelligence in those amber eyes, the scars that told a story Daniel was only beginning to understand. He found himself wondering if Emma might know more than seemed possible. That afternoon, while Emma napped, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He called his brother Mike, who worked as a detective in the county sheriff's department. "Danny, what's wrong?" Mike's voice was immediately alert. "Is Emma okay?" "She's fine. This might sound crazy, but I need you to run a check on something for me." Daniel explained about finding Atlas, about the dog's condition and the scars, about Emma's strange insistence that someone was looking for him. He left out the part about his daughter claiming to read the dog's dreams. Mike would think he'd lost his mind. "You think this dog might be connected to something criminal?" Mike asked when Daniel finished. "I don't know, maybe. There was a car parked outside this morning, and the dog went crazy when he saw it. Then it drove off when I looked outside." Mike was quiet for a moment. "Danny, there have been some rumors lately. Nothing concrete, but whispers about an illegal breeding operation somewhere in the county. Dogs being kept in bad conditions, sold to fighting rings, or worse." His voice grew grim. "If your dog escaped from something like that..." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying be careful. People who run operations like that don't like loose ends. And a dog that could identify them, that's a pretty big loose end." After Daniel hung up, he found himself looking at Atlas with new eyes. The dog was sprawled on the living room floor, Emma curled up beside him for her nap. Both of them looked so peaceful, so innocent. But if Mike was right, Daniel shook his head. He was probably overreacting. So, what if there had been a car outside? It was a public street, and Emma's claims about the dog's dreams were just her imagination, fueled by too many fairy tales and Disney movies. But as afternoon faded to evening, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every car that passed the house seemed to slow slightly. Every shadow in the yard looked suspicious. And Atlas, despite his apparent calm, never stopped watching the windows. When bedtime came, Emma insisted that Atlas sleep in her room again. Daniel didn't argue. Something about having the big dog upstairs made him feel better, even if he couldn't explain why. "Good night, Daddy," Emma called from her bed. "Good night, little bird." "Good night, Atlas. Sweet dreams tonight, okay? Try to remember the happy times, too." Daniel paused in the doorway. "What happy times, Em?" Emma was already half asleep, but she smiled. When he was little, before the bad place, he had a family who loved him. Her voice grew fainter. A little girl with braids who called him Hero. Daniel's blood ran cold. Hero, not Atlas. That was just what Emma had decided to call him. But Hero, that sounded like a real name, a name from before. And if the dog remembered a family, a little girl who loved him, then what had happened to tear them apart? Daniel barely slept that night. Every sound seemed amplified. The whisper of wind through trees, the distant hum of traffic, the soft padding of Atlas making his midnight rounds through the house. Around 3 in the morning, Daniel gave up on sleep entirely and padded downstairs to make coffee. He found Atlas in the living room, sitting by the front window like a statue. The dog's ears were pricked forward, his body tense with attention. When Daniel approached, Atlas glanced at him briefly before returning his focus to whatever held his interest outside. "What is it, boy?" Daniel whispered, moving to peer out the window. The street looked empty in the pale glow of the streetlights. Nothing moved except the gentle sway of tree branches in the night breeze. But Atlas remained vigilant, his breathing shallow and controlled. Daniel was about to turn away when he saw it, a flash of red in the darkness. The brief flare of a cigarette being lit, there and gone so quickly he almost missed it. Someone was standing in the shadows between 2 houses across the street, watching. Ice flooded Daniel's veins. He grabbed his phone, finger hovering over Mike's number. But what would he say? That someone was smoking a cigarette on a public street? That his imagination was running wild because his 5-year-old claimed to read a dog's dreams? The red glow appeared again, closer this time. Whoever it was had moved to get a better view of Daniel's house. Atlas's growl was so low it was almost inaudible, but Daniel felt it vibrate through the dog's chest. Then headlights swept the street as a late-night delivery truck rumbled past. When it was gone, the watcher had vanished. But Atlas didn't relax. If anything, he seemed more agitated, pacing between the front and back windows, as if expecting trouble from multiple directions. Morning brought no relief from the tension. Emma woke up cranky and tearful, claiming she'd had bad dreams about cages and chains. Atlas stuck close to her side, his protective instincts clearly triggered by something only he and Emma seemed to understand. "Daddy, we need to be extra careful today," Emma announced over breakfast, her small face serious. "Atlas says the danger is getting closer." "Emma, we've talked about this," Daniel began, but she cut him off. "He's not making it up, Daddy. Look." She grabbed a piece of paper and started drawing with her crayons. What emerged was far more detailed than any picture Daniel had seen his 5-year-old create before. It showed a man in dark clothes with cold, empty eyes. Behind him were rows of cages with frightened dogs inside. But it was the details that made Daniel's blood run cold. The man wore a distinctive ring on his right hand, a heavy signet ring with some kind of symbol Emma had carefully colored in black, and his face. There was something wrong with it, not deformed, but cruel in a way that even a child's drawing couldn't hide. "Where did you see this man?" Daniel asked quietly. "In Atlas's memories," Emma said matter-of-factly. "He hurt lots of dogs, made them fight each other. And when they wouldn't fight—" She didn't finish the sentence, but her crayon snapped under the pressure of her grip. Daniel studied the drawing, his mind racing. The level of detail was impossible for a child Emma's age, unless she really was somehow accessing the dog's memories. But that was impossible, wasn't it? His phone rang, making them all jump. Mike's number flashed on the screen. "Danny, I've got some information for you," Mike said without preamble, "and you're not going to like it." Daniel stepped into the next room, lowering his voice. "What did you find?" "Remember I mentioned rumors about illegal breeding operations? Well, they're more than rumors. We got a tip yesterday about a compound about 30 miles outside town. Place was raided this morning." Daniel's heart pounded. "And?" "It was bad, Danny. Really bad. Dogs in terrible condition, evidence of fighting rings, the works. But here's the thing. They found empty cages, lots of them, and tracks leading into the woods. Someone tipped them off before we got there. How many dogs got away? Hard to say. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. But Danny," Mike's voice grew grim, "the guy who ran this place, Marcus Vega, he's got a reputation for not letting things go. If he thinks one of his assets is out there somewhere." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you might want to consider taking Emma somewhere safe for a few days, just until we sort this out." Daniel looked back toward the kitchen where Emma was still drawing. Atlas pressed against her side like a furry guardian. "Mike, what does this Vega look like?" "Why do you ask?" "Just humor me." Mike sighed. Mid-40s, dark hair, cold eyes, distinctive scar through his left eyebrow from an old knife fight. Always wears this heavy ring on his right hand, some kind of family crest or something. Daniel's blood turned to ice. The description matched Emma's drawing perfectly, down to the ring. "Danny, you still there?" "I have to go," Daniel whispered. "Thanks for the warning." He hung up and rushed back to the kitchen, his mind reeling. How could Emma have drawn such an accurate picture of a man she'd never seen? Unless Atlas really had shown her his memories somehow. But even if that were possible, and Daniel's rational mind insisted it wasn't, how could they prove it? Emma looked up as he entered, her face pale. "He's coming, isn't he? The bad man?" Before Daniel could answer, Atlas suddenly bolted upright, his head swiveling toward the back of the house. A low, menacing growl rolled from his throat, the sound of a predator preparing for battle. "Get away from the windows," Daniel ordered, scooping Emma into his arms. "Right now." They retreated to the center hallway, the most protected part of the house. Atlas positioned himself between them and the back door, his hackles raised, lips pulled back to reveal impressive fangs. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Then Daniel heard it, the soft scrape of footsteps on the back deck. Someone was trying to be quiet, but the old boards betrayed every step. Daniel's phone was in his hand, thumb hovering over 911, when the footsteps stopped. Whoever was out there had paused directly outside the kitchen door. Atlas's growl deepened, becoming a continuous rumble of warning. Emma buried her face against Daniel's neck, but she wasn't crying. Instead, she whispered something that made Daniel's skin crawl. "He wants Atlas back. He says Atlas belongs to him." "Emma, what?" The kitchen door exploded inward. Two men burst through the splintered doorway, moving with the practiced efficiency of professionals. The first was young and wiry, with prison tattoos covering his arms. But it was the second man who made Daniel's heart stop. He looked exactly like Emma's drawing. The same cold eyes, the same cruel mouth, the same heavy ring catching the light as he gestured to his companion. Marcus Vega had found them. "Easy now," Vega said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "Nobody needs to get hurt. I just want my property back." Atlas launched himself forward with a roar of fury that shook the house. But the younger man was ready, pulling a tranquilizer gun from his jacket and firing in one fluid motion. The dart caught Atlas in the shoulder, and the big dog stumbled, his charge becoming a clumsy lunge. "No!" Emma screamed, struggling in Daniel's arms. "Don't hurt him!" Vega's cold gaze fixed on her, and something flickered in those dead eyes. Recognition? Calculation? Daniel couldn't tell, but it made his skin crawl. Well, well, Vega murmured. The little girl who talks to dogs. I've heard about you. You haven't heard anything, Daniel snarled, backing toward the front of the house. Get out of my home. Your home, Vega laughed, the sound like broken glass. You're harboring stolen property, friend. That dog is worth more than this whole neighborhood. Atlas was fighting the tranquilizer, swaying on his feet but still trying to protect Emma. The drug was strong, but his determination was stronger. He's not property, Emma said, her voice small but fierce. He's family. Family? Vega stepped closer, and Daniel could see the madness lurking behind his calculated facade. That animal is a killer, little girl, a weapon I spent months training. He's killed other dogs, torn them apart for my customers' entertainment. You're lying, Emma shouted. Atlas would never hurt anyone. You made him do bad things, but that's not who he really is. Vega's eyes narrowed. And how would you know that? Because he told me, Emma said simply. He told me about the little girl with braids who used to love him, about how you stole him from her yard and brought him to the bad place, about how you tried to make him mean, but he remembered being good. The silence that followed was deafening. Vega stared at Emma with something approaching shock, while his companion shifted nervously. Boss, the younger man muttered, we should just grab the dog and go. But Vega held up a hand, his attention fixed entirely on Emma. What else did he tell you? Emma's chin lifted defiantly. He told me your real name isn't Marcus, it's Tommy, and you used to have a dog just like him when you were little, a dog that got hit by a car because you forgot to close the gate. Vega went deadly still. The color drained from his face, leaving only those cold, empty eyes. That's impossible, he whispered. His name was Sergeant, Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. And when he died, you cried for 3 days. But then you decided never to love anything again, because love hurts too much. Shut up. Vega's voice was barely human now. Atlas feels sorry for you, Emma said softly. He knows you're just scared and hurt inside, but that doesn't make it okay to hurt other people. Vega pulled a gun from his jacket, his hand shaking with rage. I said shut up! That's when Atlas made his move. Despite the tranquilizer coursing through his system, the big dog lunged forward, not at Vega, but at his companion. The younger man screamed as Atlas's weight bowled him over, the tranquilizer gun flying across the room. Run, Daniel shouted, carrying Emma toward the front door. Call 911. But Vega was already moving, surprisingly fast for a man his age. He caught Daniel at the doorway, the gun pressed against his temple. Nobody's calling anyone, Vega snarled. That dog knows too much, and apparently so does your little freak daughter. She's just a child, Daniel pleaded. She doesn't understand what she's saying. Oh, but she does. Vega's eyes were wild now, the mask of civilization completely gone. Don't you, little girl? You can really hear what he's thinking, can't you? Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. He's thinking about the little girl with braids. Her name was Sophie. She had brown eyes and she loved to braid dandelions into his fur. Vega made a sound like a wounded animal. Stop. She looked for him for weeks after you took him, made posters with his picture, walked through the neighborhood calling his name. Emma's voice was gentle now, full of compassion. She never stopped loving him. I said stop! Vega raised the gun, pointing it directly at Emma. That's when the front door burst open and police officers flooded the room, weapons drawn. Mike's voice cut through the chaos. Drop the weapon, now! But Vega was past reason, his finger tightening on the trigger. Daniel closed his eyes, pulling Emma closer, preparing for the worst. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the confined space. But when Daniel opened his eyes, Vega was on the ground, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. Atlas stood over him, the tranquilizer finally taking full effect, but still conscious enough to have knocked the gun aside at the crucial moment. Good boy, Emma whispered, as Atlas collapsed beside her, his eyes already closing. You saved us. As the police took Vega and his accomplice into custody, Emma knelt beside the unconscious dog, stroking his fur gently. Is he going to be okay? She asked Dr. Brown, who had arrived with the paramedics. He'll be fine, the veterinarian assured her. The tranquilizer will wear off in a few hours. He's a strong boy. The strongest, Emma agreed. She leaned down to whisper in Atlas's ear. Sophie would be so proud of you. You remembered how to be a hero. Daniel watched his daughter comfort the dog who had saved their lives, and for the first time, he didn't question her impossible connection to the animal. Some things, he realized, didn't need explanations. They just needed acceptance. Later, after the chaos had died down and Atlas was awake and alert again, Mike pulled Daniel aside. "How did she know all that stuff about Vega?" he asked quietly. "About his childhood, his real name, all of it?" Daniel looked at Emma, who was curled up on the couch with Atlas, both of them finally at peace. "Would you believe me if I told you?" Mike followed his gaze, watching the little girl and the big dog who seemed to understand each other perfectly. "After what I saw today," he said slowly, "I might believe anything." As night fell, Daniel tucked Emma into bed, Atlas once again taking his position as guardian on the makeshift bed beside her. "Daddy," Emma said sleepily, "Atlas wants to know if we can visit Sophie someday. She lives in the next town over and she still misses him." Daniel smiled, no longer surprised by his daughter's impossible knowledge. "I think that can be arranged, little bird. I think Atlas deserves to see his first family again." "And then he'll come home with us?" "If that's what he wants." Emma nodded, satisfied. "He does. He says we're his real family now, the one he chose." As Daniel turned off the light, he heard Emma whisper one last thing to her protector. "Sweet dreams, Atlas. Dream about Sophie and the dandelions. Dream about being loved." And in the darkness, Daniel could swear he heard the dog's tail thumping softly against the floor, as if he understood every word. 3 days passed in relative peace. Marcus Vega was in custody, charged with multiple felonies including breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and operating an illegal animal fighting ring. His compound had been shut down, and the remaining dogs were being rehabilitated at various shelters across the state. It should have been over. But Atlas couldn't settle. Despite the apparent resolution, the big dog remained on edge, pacing the house at irregular intervals and startling at sounds that hadn't bothered him before. His sleep was restless, punctuated by whimpers and twitching paws that suggested troubled dreams. Emma noticed first, as she always did. "He's still scared," she told Daniel over breakfast on the 4th morning. "The bad feelings haven't gone away." Daniel looked at Atlas, who was positioned by the kitchen window, despite having eaten his breakfast an hour ago. The dog's stance was alert, watchful, the pose of a sentry expecting trouble. "Maybe he just needs more time to adjust," Daniel suggested. "He's been through a lot." But even as he said it, Daniel felt his own unease growing. Mike had called yesterday with an update that should have been reassuring. Vega's operation was finished, his associates either arrested or scattered. The threat was over. So, why did Daniel still check the locks twice before bed? Why did every passing car make him tense? And why did Atlas continue his midnight patrols as if expecting an attack? The answer came at noon, in the form of a knock at the front door. Atlas erupted into fierce barking, positioning himself protectively in front of Emma. But this time, his posture was different. Alert and defensive, yes, but not the aggressive stance he'd taken with Vega's men. This was the bark of a dog announcing visitors, not intruders. Daniel peered through the peephole and saw a man in his 50s standing on the porch, well-dressed in an expensive suit, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like a businessman or lawyer, respectable, harmless, but Atlas was having none of it. The dog's barking intensified, and he began backing toward Emma, herding her away from the door. "It's okay, boy," Daniel said, reaching for the door handle. "He looks normal enough." "Don't open it, Daddy," Emma's voice was sharp with panic. "Atlas says he's one of them." Daniel's hand froze on the handle. "One of who, Em?" "The bad men? He looks nice, but inside he's just like the others." The man knocked again, his voice muffled but audible through the door. "Mr. Wilson, my name is Dr. Richard Steinberg. I represent certain parties interested in acquiring your dog. I'd like to discuss a business proposition." Daniel's blood ran cold. The polite words, the professional tone, they couldn't hide the underlying threat. This wasn't a social call. "We're not interested," Daniel called through the door. "The dog isn't for sale." "I think you'll find my offer quite generous," Dr. Steinberg replied smoothly. "Perhaps we could discuss this face to face. I assure you, I'm not here to cause trouble." Atlas's growling deepened, becoming a continuous rumble of warning. Emma clutched the dog's fur, her face pale with fear. "He's lying, Daddy," she whispered. "Atlas can smell the meanness on him, and there are others waiting." "Others?" Daniel moved to the window, carefully peering around the edge of the curtain. Sure enough, he could see at least 2 more men positioned at the corners of his property. They were trying to look casual, one reading a newspaper, another checking his phone, but their positions were too strategic to be coincidental. "Mr. Wilson," Dr. Steinberg called again, "I'm afraid I must insist we speak. You see, you're in possession of property that belongs to my clients. Property they're quite anxious to recover." "Property?" Daniel's anger flared. "He's a living being, not property." "Legally speaking, you're incorrect." Steinberg's voice remained maddeningly calm. "The animal in question was bred and trained by a licensed facility. While there may have been some irregularities in how that facility was operated, the ownership papers are quite clear." "Vega's in jail," Daniel shot back. "His operation was shut down." "Mr. Vega was merely a contractor," Steinberg explained. "The true owners of his stock remain at large, and they're prepared to compensate you handsomely for returning their investment." Daniel's mind raced. If Vega had been working for someone else, someone with enough resources to hire lawyers and send teams of men, then this was far from over. They weren't dealing with a single criminal, but an entire organization. "How much are we talking about?" Daniel called, stalling for time while he reached for his phone. $100,000, Steinberg replied without hesitation. "Cash, untraceable. All you have to do is walk away for 1 hour. When you return, the dog will be gone, and you'll be considerably wealthier." Emma gasped, and Atlas pressed closer to her, sensing her distress. The little girl's eyes were wide with terror. "They want to hurt him, Daddy," she whispered. "Not just use him for fighting. They want to study him, because he can do special things." "What special things?" Daniel asked, though he was beginning to understand. "He can talk to people in their minds, like he talks to me. They want to figure out how he does it, and then make more dogs like him." Emma's voice broke. "But the studying would hurt him, maybe kill him." Daniel felt sick. If Emma was right, and her track record was disturbingly accurate, then these people weren't just criminals. They were monsters willing to torture an innocent animal for profit. "Mr. Wilson," Steinberg's patience was clearly wearing thin. "I need an answer." "Go to hell," Daniel snarled, hitting Mike's number on his phone. The response was immediate. Daniel heard the sharp whistle of a signal, and suddenly the men at the corners of his property were moving, not running, walking with purpose toward the house. "Very disappointing," Steinberg said sadly. "I had hoped we could resolve this amicably." Daniel's call went straight to voicemail. Mike was probably in court or interrogating Vega's associates. No help coming from that quarter. Atlas was barking frantically now, running between the front and back doors as he tracked the approaching men. Emma clung to Daniel's leg, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, we have to run," she sobbed. "They have nets and cages in their cars, and needles that make dogs sleep forever." Daniel scooped Emma into his arms and ran for the back door. If they could reach the neighbor's house, maybe they could. The back door exploded inward just as they reached it. 2 men in dark clothing burst through, moving with military precision. One carried a large net, the other a dart gun like the one Vega's accomplice had used. Atlas threw himself at the first man, but these weren't street thugs like Vega's crew. They were professionals, prepared for a large, aggressive dog. The net wrapped around Atlas's head and shoulders, tangling his legs and sending him crashing to the floor. "Run, Emma!" Daniel shouted, setting her down and pushing her toward the stairs. "Hide!" But more men were coming through the front door now, cutting off their escape routes. Daniel found himself surrounded, holding nothing but a kitchen knife he'd grabbed from the counter. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Dr. Steinberg said, stepping delicately over the splintered remains of the back door. "No one has to get hurt." "You're already hurting him," Emma screamed from the stairway, where one of the men had caught her. "Let Atlas go." "I'm afraid that's not possible, my dear," Steinberg replied smoothly. "He's far too valuable to leave in amateur hands." Atlas was struggling desperately in the net, his powerful body thrashing as he tried to reach Emma. But the more he fought, the more tangled he became. One of the men raised his dart gun, aiming for the dog's exposed flank. "No!" Emma broke free from her captor and threw herself toward Atlas. "Don't hurt him!" The dart meant for Atlas caught Emma in the shoulder instead. Time seemed to stop. Emma looked down at the dart protruding from her small body with confused eyes, then up at Daniel with the expression of such betrayal that it broke his heart. "Daddy?" she whispered, then collapsed. Atlas's roar of fury shook the house. With strength born of desperate rage, he tore through the net like tissue paper and launched himself at the man who had shot Emma. The professional training, the expensive equipment, none of it mattered in the face of a protector defending his pack. The man's scream cut off abruptly as Atlas's jaws closed around his throat. "Shoot the dog!" Steinberg shouted. "Shoot it now!" But Atlas was a whirlwind of tooth and claw, moving too fast for the remaining men to get a clear shot. He released the first man, who was still breathing but would need extensive medical attention, and turned toward Emma's still form. "Stay back," Daniel warned, but Atlas ignored him. The big dog approached Emma gently, sniffing her face and whimpering softly. When she didn't respond, he pressed his nose against her neck, checking for a pulse. Relief flooded Daniel as he saw Emma's chest rising and falling steadily. She was unconscious but alive. "The tranquilizer was meant for a 150-pound dog," one of the men said nervously. "A child that size." "She'll be fine," Steinberg snapped, but Daniel could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Bag the dog and let's get out of here." "I don't think so." The new voice came from the front doorway, where Mike stood with his service weapon drawn. Behind him, Daniel could see more police officers taking positions around the house. "Sheriff's Department," Mike shouted. "Everyone on the ground, now!" The next few minutes were chaos. Some of Steinberg's men tried to flee, others reached for weapons, and one fool actually tried to grab Atlas, a mistake that cost him several fingers and his dignity. When the dust settled, all of Steinberg's team was in custody, and Emma was being loaded into an ambulance. The tranquilizer meant for Atlas would have been strong enough to kill her if she hadn't received immediate medical attention. "How did you know to come?" Daniel asked Mike as they followed the ambulance to the hospital. "Anonymous tip," Mike replied grimly. "Someone called in reports of armed men surrounding your house. Voice was disguised, but—" He glanced at Atlas, who was riding in the back of Mike's patrol car. "Did you call it in?" Daniel shook his head. "I tried to call you, but it went to voicemail." Mike was quiet for a moment. "Then who—" They both looked at Atlas, who was staring out the window toward the hospital where Emma was being treated. The dog's eyes were alert and intelligent, far more intelligent than any normal animal should be. "Maybe," Daniel said slowly, "we're not asking the right question. Maybe it's not who called it in. Maybe it's how." At the hospital, Dr. Reynolds assured them that Emma would make a full recovery. The tranquilizer had been strong, but not fatal. She would sleep for several hours, then wake up groggy but unharmed. "She's lucky," the doctor said. "A dose that size could have stopped her heart." Daniel sat beside Emma's bed, holding her small hand while Atlas lay on the floor beside them. The hospital had bent their no pets policy after Mike explained the circumstances, and after seeing how the dog refused to leave Emma's side. "This isn't over, is it?" Daniel asked Mike, who was standing guard by the door. "Probably not," Mike admitted. "Steinberg's not talking, but we found some interesting items in his car. Business cards for something called Prometheus Research, and a file with Emma's name on it." "Emma's name? Why would they have a file on my daughter?" Mike's expression was grim. "Because, according to these documents, they've been watching your family for weeks, ever since reports started surfacing about a little girl who could communicate telepathically with animals." Daniel's blood ran cold. "That's impossible. We haven't told anyone about—" He trailed off, remembering Dr. Brown's office, the neighbors who had seen Emma with Atlas, the grocery store clerk who had watched her calm an aggressive dog in the parking lot just by talking to it. "Word gets around in a small town," Mike said quietly, "and apparently some people are very interested in children with unusual abilities." As if sensing they were talking about her, Emma stirred in the hospital bed. Her eyes fluttered open, immediately seeking Atlas. When she saw him lying beside her bed, she smiled weakly. "You saved me," she whispered to the dog. "You called for help." Atlas lifted his head, gently licking her hand where it dangled over the side of the bed. "How did he call for help, Em?" Daniel asked softly. Emma's eyes were already drifting closed again, but she managed to answer. "Same way he talks to me, Daddy. He found a nice lady walking her dog and put the words in her head, told her exactly what to say to the police." She fell back asleep, leaving Daniel and Mike staring at each other in stunned silence. "That's impossible," Mike said finally. Daniel looked at Atlas, who was watching them with those impossibly intelligent amber eyes. The dog seemed to understand every word they were saying, and more importantly, seemed to understand the implications. "Is it?" Daniel asked. "After everything we've seen?" Outside Emma's room, the world continued its normal rhythm. Doctors made rounds, visitors came and went, and life moved forward as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Daniel knew that nothing would ever be normal again. They had become the guardians of something unprecedented, a dog with abilities that shouldn't exist, and a little girl who could unlock secrets that some people would kill for. And somewhere out there, those people were planning their next move. The plan came together faster than Daniel had expected. Within hours of Emma's release from the hospital, Mike had arranged for them to disappear, not permanently, just long enough for the FBI to dismantle the network that had targeted his family. Prometheus research is bigger than we thought, Mike explained as he helped them pack. They've got connections in government, academia, even some military contracts. But they also made a mistake going after a cop's family. Every law enforcement agency in 3 states is looking for them now. Emma sat on her bed, carefully folding clothes while Atlas watched from the doorway. The dog hadn't left her side since the hospital. His protective instincts heightened to an almost supernatural degree. "How long do we have to hide?" Emma asked quietly. "Just a few weeks, little bird," Daniel promised, "until the bad people are caught." But even as he said it, Daniel could see the doubt in his daughter's eyes. She was too smart, had seen too much. The innocence that should have protected her from such harsh realities had been stripped away by circumstances beyond anyone's control. "They won't stop," she said simply. "Even if these ones get caught, there will be others. Atlas is too special. They'll always want him." The matter-of-fact way she stated this truth made Daniel's heart ache. No 5-year-old should have to think about such things. "Then we'll keep protecting him," Daniel said firmly. "All of us together." Emma nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Atlas says there's something else. Something he hasn't told me yet because it's too scary." Before Daniel could ask what she meant, Mike's radio crackled to life. "All units, we have reports of suspicious vehicles in the Wilson neighborhood. Possible hostiles moving in." Mike cursed under his breath. "They found us faster than expected. We need to move. Now." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Daniel threw the last of their essential items into bags while Mike coordinated with other units. Atlas paced anxiously, his supernatural senses clearly detecting approaching danger. "Daddy," Emma said urgently, tugging at his shirt. "Atlas says they're not just coming for him this time, they're coming for me too." "What do you mean?" "They want to study both of us, to figure out how we can talk to each other." Her small face was pale with fear. "They think if they can understand how it works, they can make it happen with other people and other animals." The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. If these people could weaponize the connection between Emma and Atlas, create armies of psychically linked soldiers and animals, the military applications would be devastating. "We're leaving," he said grimly, shouldering the largest bag. "Right now." They made it as far as the back door before the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, casting eerie shadows through the house. But in that moment of darkness, Daniel heard something that made his blood freeze. The soft whisper of footsteps on the stairs. Someone was already inside. Atlas erupted into fierce barking, but this time his warning came too late. The house had been breached from multiple points simultaneously, and now they were trapped. "Police! Everyone down!" Mike shouted, his weapon drawn. But the response came from everywhere at once. Professional voices calling from different rooms, coordinated movements in the darkness. These weren't random criminals or even Steinberg's hired thugs. These were military, or ex-military, moving with precision and purpose. "Federal agents," one of them called. "Stand down immediately." "Federal agents my ass," Mike snarled. "Where are your badges? Your warrants?" "We don't need warrants for matters of national security," came the cold reply. "The subjects will come with us voluntarily, or they'll come unconscious. Your choice." Daniel pulled Emma behind him, Atlas forming a protective barrier in front of them both. The big dog was growling continuously now, his hackles raised, ready to fight to the death if necessary. "National security?" Daniel challenged. "We're talking about a little girl and her dog." "We're talking about potential weapons of unprecedented power," the voice corrected. "Telepathic communication between humans and animals could revolutionize warfare, intelligence gathering, even space exploration. Did you really think we'd let such assets remain in civilian hands?" Emma stepped out from behind Daniel, her small chin raised defiantly. "Assets?" she said, her voice carrying more authority than any 5-year-old should possess. "We're not assets, we're people, and Atlas isn't a weapon. He's family." "Emma, get back," Daniel started, but she held up a hand to stop him. "It's okay, Daddy," she said calmly. "Atlas has a plan." Before anyone could react, Emma placed her hand on Atlas's head and closed her eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Daniel felt it, a strange pressure in his mind, like the buildup before a thunderstorm. The sensation grew stronger, and suddenly Daniel could hear something impossible, not with his ears, but inside his thoughts. Atlas's voice, clear as day. "Trust us. Whatever happens next, trust us." Daniel gasped, staggering backward. Around him, he could see the armed men reacting similarly, some dropping their weapons to clutch their heads, others backing away in confusion. Emma's eyes snapped open, now glowing with an otherworldly light. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that shouldn't exist, as if Atlas was speaking through her. "You want to know what we can do?" she asked the hidden agents. "You want to see our potential?" The pressure in Daniel's mind intensified, and suddenly he could hear everything. Not just Atlas's thoughts, but Mike's confusion, the agent's fear, even the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses away. The entire neighborhood had become a symphony of consciousness, all of it flowing through Emma and Atlas. "We can do more than communicate," Emma continued, her voice now carrying impossible depth. "We can heal." She reached out toward one of the agents who had emerged from the shadows, a man with a pronounced limp and old scars covering half his face. Without touching him, Emma somehow connected with his damaged nerves, his broken memories of whatever war had wounded him. The man's expression shifted from aggression to wonder as decades of chronic pain simply vanished. His limp disappeared, his scars faded, and for the first time in years, he stood completely straight. "Or we can harm," Emma added, her tone becoming darker. Another agent, the one who had spoken so coldly about assets and weapons, suddenly doubled over in agony. Not physical pain, but emotional torture, as every cruel thing he'd ever done came flooding back with perfect clarity. Every person he'd hurt, every order he'd followed without question, every moment he'd chosen power over compassion. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Please," he gasped, "make it stop." "Emma," Daniel said urgently, "that's enough." But when Emma turned to look at him, Daniel saw that his little girl was no longer entirely in control. The connection she'd forged with Atlas had opened something vast and powerful, something beyond what either of them could handle alone. "Help us." Atlas's voice was strained now, desperate. "She's too young for this much power. Help us contain it." Without fully understanding what he was doing, Daniel reached out and placed his hands on both Emma and Atlas. The moment he made contact, the overwhelming symphony of thoughts suddenly focused, channeled through their family bond into something manageable. Emma blinked, the otherworldly glow fading from her eyes. The pressure in everyone's minds eased, leaving behind a profound silence. "That," said a new voice from the doorway, "was remarkable." Daniel turned to see an elderly woman entering the house. She wore a simple gray suit and carried herself with quiet authority. Behind her came 2 men in FBI jackets, real ones, with proper identification clearly visible. "Dr. Sarah Chen," the woman introduced herself, "Director of the Department of Extraordinary Phenomena. We've been tracking the illegal research into telepathic abilities for quite some time." "Illegal research?" Mike asked, still shaking his head to clear it. "Prometheus Research operates without government sanction," Dr. Chen explained. "They're rogue scientists using children and animals for unauthorized experiments. We've been trying to shut them down for months." She looked at Emma with something approaching awe. "But I've never seen anything like what just happened here. You didn't just communicate telepathically, you temporarily merged consciousness across multiple subjects. The applications for medical treatment, psychological therapy, even conflict resolution. Are you here to take us away too?" Emma asked quietly. Dr. Chen knelt to Emma's level, her expression gentle. "I'm here to offer you protection, real protection, not imprisonment, a chance to understand your abilities without exploitation." "What does that mean?" Daniel asked suspiciously. "It means you continue living your normal lives," Dr. Chen replied, "with some additional security and occasional consultations to help us understand these phenomena. But no experiments, no weapons research, no treating you like laboratory subjects." Emma looked at Atlas, and Daniel could almost see the silent communication passing between them. Finally, she nodded. "Atlas says you're telling the truth," she announced. and that you lost someone special to bad people like the ones who hurt him. Dr. Chen's composure cracked slightly. My grandson, she said softly. He showed signs of unusual abilities when he was about your age. Prometheus took him before we understood what they were doing. Her voice hardened. That's why I've made it my mission to stop them. Did you find him? Emma asked with heartbreaking hope. We're still looking, Dr. Chen replied. But what you've shown us today, it gives me hope that we might be able to help him when we do. Over the next hour, Daniel learned more about the hidden world of extraordinary abilities than he had ever imagined existed. Children around the globe were manifesting inexplicable talents, telepathy, precognition, even limited reality manipulation. Most were being quietly recruited by government agencies or stolen by criminal organizations. Emma and Atlas represent something unique, Dr. Chen explained. True interspecies telepathic bonding. If we can understand how it works, we might be able to help other gifted children find similar connections. Imagine the applications for autism therapy, PTSD treatment, even wildlife conservation. And the military applications? Daniel asked pointedly. Dr. Chen's expression grew grim. We'll be classified and heavily restricted. I've seen what happens when abilities like these are weaponized. The cost is always too high. As the sun began to set, the immediate crisis passed. Prometheus Research's agents were in custody, their network exposed and crumbling under federal investigation. Steinberg had finally started talking, providing evidence that would put his entire organization behind bars. But the larger questions remained. What were Emma and Atlas becoming? How far could their abilities develop? And what responsibilities came with such extraordinary gifts? That evening, as they sat in their living room, now under the discreet protection of actual federal agents, Emma curled up against Atlas on the couch. The big dog's eyes were peaceful for the first time since they'd found him, as if some fundamental fear had finally been laid to rest. Daddy, Emma said sleepily, Atlas wants you to know something. What's that, little bird? He says thank you for giving us a chance to be a real family. She yawned, snuggling deeper into Atlas's fur. And he says he's ready to help other kids like me now, kids who are scared and alone and don't understand what's happening to them. Daniel smiled, stroking both his daughter's hair and the dog's ears. Tell him we'll figure it out together. All of us. He says he already knows, Emma mumbled, already half asleep. He says that's what families do. As Daniel watched them sleep, his impossible daughter and her extraordinary companion, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just hope, but purpose. They had been chosen for something remarkable, something that could help change the world for the better. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new adventures. But tonight, they were simply a family, a man, his daughter, and a dog who had saved them all by teaching them that love could overcome any obstacle, even the barriers between species, between minds, between what was possible and what was real. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and if Daniel listened very carefully, he could almost hear the whispered thoughts of every living thing for miles around, all connected by invisible threads of consciousness that Emma and Atlas had helped reveal. The world was about to become a much more interesting place. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this story touched your heart. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global audience who believes that love knows no boundaries, not even between humans and the animals who choose to trust us with their extraordinary gifts. Remember, the most powerful connections are often the ones we can't see, but we can always feel them in our hearts.